The original Counter-Strike was the first multiplayer shooter I spent any serious time playing, and I reckon throughout my teenage years I easily invested thousands of hours into it. A lot of that spent in LAN cafes, but also a sizable chunk of it was back at home on my dad's computer. And what it reminds me of the most is being the last one still awake in the house. Sitting on the computer at 1 AM in a darkened room with my headphones on and that glow coming off that CRT monitor. A lot of the time as well, just hanging out in empty servers, waiting for other people to join and just taking that extra time to get more familiar with the map layouts. I have noticed a bit of a trend recently on YouTube in that regard as well, looking back at empty servers or forgotten multiplayer games, and exploring that sense of bizarre emptiness you can only get from these uncanny video game environments. There was even a game that recently released on Steam called Ghostware Arena that takes that concept one step further, and explores what might happen if maps from old arena shooters endured over time, but then also started to get corrupted, glitch out, and eventually become haunted. Having you play as an NPC that's somehow been brought back to life and is trying to make sense of their existence in what seems to be this crumbling, decayed executable. Anyway, it's no real secret that the Gold Source engine and horror go hand in hand. With a good example being some of those earlier chapters in Half-Life, where you found yourself under-equipped and face-to-face with zombies, or those times where it was just you and a lone head crab in a pitch-black vent. Along with, of course, what's arguably one of the scariest mods ever made with Day Hunger. But I mean, even just Counter-Strike's premise to begin with is kinda tense when you think about it. I mean, you got the whole hunting down the other team aspect, but then also the way that players died off and dwindled away in each round, with people eventually walking to hide their footsteps and increase their chances of survival. And turning a corner to find that one last player lying in wait is the kind of thing that heart attacks are made of. But I don't think the premise of a map being empty is scary in and of itself. And contrary to what a lot of people might say these days, simply being alone in an area by yourself is not inherently unsettling or frightening. I mean, look man, walking around an unpopulated Dust 2 is not going to fill me with a sense of existential dread.
Oh man! Oh god! Oh man! Oh god! Oh man!
However, when you add certain other elements into the mix, namely the sound and some moody lighting, well, then yeah, it can start to have an effect. And what I find most interesting is the maps in Counter-Strike where it doesn't even seem like that was the intention. A map like Storm, for instance, is just your basic defusal map, set in some kind of rustic village in the mountains somewhere, either in the early morning or in the evening. And there's nothing particularly unnerving or creepy about it, but the dark visuals and inclusion of a thunderstorm off in the distance, combined with the claustrophobic nature of these interior areas, it does kind of add a sense of tension that these other maps often don't have. Still though, not entirely unsettling, and if you pack this map full of people, then it obviously loses that effect instantly. But roaming around it solo, you could definitely start to get a sense of unease. Survivor, on the other hand, takes that concept even further, having a genuinely bizarre and ominous vibe, which is kinda weird too, considering that this was an official map at the time. Right, so this is again another defusal map. And I guess the concept with this one is that you're the survivor of a plane crash who's stuck in the middle of some kind of snowy village somewhere. But it's not the premise that's off-putting, it's the creepy use of ambient noises throughout parts of the map, which really feel like something out of an entirely different game. For starters, it seems like almost every cave in the map has this weird sort of humming effect, almost like it's the distorted sound of the blood rushing through the player's head or something. There's a couple of valleys on the side of the map which have these giant crystals on the walls, and this has an outright otherworldly feel, like the crystals are alien and not even meant to be there. Walking across this wooden bridge, you can hear this subtle groaning noise as the wood creaks underneath your feet. And then if you walk over the bridge on the other side, then the whole thing collapses entirely, dropping you down to the frozen river below. Nearby you'll come across what looks like a little town with these oddly small buildings which don't really make any sense given their scale. Again too with some off-putting ambient noise, which has no real source or even explainable origin. And then when you finally get to the site of the plane crash, which is one of the 2 areas you can plant the bomb as a terrorist, you find the place completely deserted, with the wreckage of the plane being completely empty and the sound of a lone wolf howling off in the distance. Survivor might have actually worked pretty well as a hostage rescue map, which would have made sense given the premise of a downed plane, but the absence of any NPCs whatsoever and the surrounding area being this frozen ghost town, it really gives this map its whole own vibe.
I'm scared to death. I'm frightened and I don't know what to do. I'm confused and I want to go home.
And there is a reason, man, why so many people bring this map up as one that they remember as being unsettling or creepy to play through. Again, like Storm though, when you fill this thing up with a full team, then that effect is lost entirely. Which makes it even kind of weirder to think as well that someone spent all this time crafting this haunting soundscape in a map which otherwise would have been deafened out by the sound of AK-47s and people spraying their pornographic spray tags.
Terrorists win.
Now, one map that actually did thrive when it had people in it was Oil Rig, and I do kind of doubt that this one was ever intended to be scary because truthfully, it's more suspenseful than it is properly frightening. It's just that I always found the concept of this map made me very anxious. And that's because compared to other maps where the objective was just to rescue the hostages or plant a bomb, Oil Rig was an escort map, and the goal there was to get a VIP to a chopper so they could escape.
Counter-terrorists win.
The game would randomly choose who was going to be the VIP each round, and then everyone else had to basically protect that person while the terrorists hunted them down. The fastest way to get to the top was a stairway and a lift that got you there in seconds, but using it left you wide open, and it also made a whole bunch of noise, meaning every man and his dog was going to know when you were trying to use it. And it's when you play through this thing solo where it starts to become nail-biting, because trying to make that solitary journey from the bottom to the top could be fraught with suspense. Hearing the loud thudding footsteps of the terrorists as they run around above you trying to search you out. In fact, back in the day, before we had a decent internet connection, in the days of 56k modems, I'd often just create my own custom matches offline, putting a bunch of bots on the terrorist team and then trying to see if I could escape solo. Making that final push to the chopper was absolutely nerve-wracking, knowing that someone was probably watching it from a nearby window and waiting. And then the other thing is that the more rounds you play against the bots, the better guns they can obviously start to buy, which makes it even more challenging.
Terrorists win.
And even now, like messing around with that idea to get footage for this video, like it was still really fun and surprisingly stressful at times. It's kind of a shame that the whole VIP map style never really took off that much, and as far as I know, like Oil Rig was the only official map they ever supported. Either way though, it's an awesome concept which made for some really harrowing escape sequences. Not to mention a great game of cat and mouse when you got to play as the terrorists and be the hunters. Like I said though, I don't think it was their intention to make it feel that way, but that's definitely the way it came across for me back when I was playing it as a young Sonny Jim. When it comes to Estate though, now I'm almost certain that this one was made to be weird and surreal on purpose. Now this is a pretty innocuous hostage rescue map that has the player spawning on the street as a counter-terrorist and given a couple of options with how to proceed. Either just walking right up to the front door and ringing the doorbell, or sneaking through the nearby sewers and coming up through the basement. And at first things seem pretty normal, right? Despite the fact that this ground floor has a definite liminal feeling to the lighting and the wallpaper. But when you get to the stairway to the second floor is where things start to feel a bit eerie. For starters, you've got a giant framed painting of the Scream on the wall, but then more than that you'll notice that the lights are off on the second floor. Once you head up the stairs, you'll see how the entire place is near pitch black. And looking out of a nearby window, it makes it seem like the estate itself is really high up on some kind of serene mountain somewhere. But what I found the weirdest though was how the only light source on the second floor is a glow that comes from the second bedroom. And then when you open this door, you come to what looks like a kid's room, with only the light from a TV and the static noise being the only thing you can hear. If none of this is sounding all that weird though, well, now consider that this only happens if you're playing this map by yourself. Because if you're playing this with anyone else, be it bots or other players, then the lights on the second floor are inadvertently turned on and you can see everything here as normal.
Rescue. Okay, you lead the way.
But if you're playing solo, the lights are off and it somehow feels much darker and more sinister. Which really leads me to believe that the person who made this map was just trying to creep people out. You know, if they decided to check this one out by themselves. Someone even made a rainy version of this map as well, which is pretty much the exact same thing, just adding in a heavy rainstorm on top of that existing atmosphere. And it is a scientific fact that adding in rain to a video game increases the overall atmosphere by about 3,000%. Oh yeah, and this time too, when you go to that kid's room with the TV, for some reason the hostage is standing with his back to the door when you enter, like he's the guy at the end of the Blair Witch or something. This one is also a pretty good example, I think, of how modders were able to take the design template for those official maps and then refashion them in their own ways. And it's probably no surprise that some of the best content out there has come from those amateur map makers. Some of which aren't even really trying to directly be scary, and then of course others which are just trying to outright fuck with the player's mental well-being. And I'll give 3 examples here of the kind of maps I'm talking about, with Atlantis, Spooks, and then the aptly named Silent Hill.
I got a letter.
Shut up!
Right, so this first one takes place in the city of Atlantis. Yeah, no points for figuring that one out. The so-called Lost City, which apparently now seems to have been discovered, and hooked up with working electricity and even lights. Which means that, of course, terrorists want to blow the whole thing up with some C4. Makes sense. Anyway, what's interesting about this map is that it's obviously not meant to be frightening, but there's just something about the premise itself which is just so off-putting. The idea of being thousands of feet under the sea, for instance, where you've really got no means of escape if something goes horribly wrong, I mean, that concept is just fraught enough to begin with. There's even a few areas where you can see the ocean leaking back in, reminding you yet again of how you're trapped inside this sunken tomb. Other elements though suggest that this map is definitely trying to mess with the player, which is immediately apparent by some of these ambient noises and effects.
What was that noise?
Some of which almost kind of sounds like quiet whispering. There's also this constant humming of electricity whenever you're near the power generators, which is kind of bizarre as well. And then at one point you come across a door which warns you about entering, leading down to a room where lava seems to be funneled in as some kind of power source. Overall, it just has this really surreal vibe, kind of reminded me of something out of a Thief game, which is kind of funny to mention considering that Thief had that mission called the Lost City, which, you know, is more or less a reference to Atlantis as well. Still though, not really a map I'd classify as horror, you know, maybe just something I'd call fucking bizarre instead.
Terrorists win.
However, that does bring me on to Spooks.
There's no turning back now.
Now this map is clearly based off the Haunted Mansion ride at Disneyland. It's a hostage rescue set inside a spooky house, complete with all manner of unsettling rooms, sounds and imagery. You can even ride one of those doom buggies from beginning to end, starting in the room with the stretching paintings all the way through to the graveyard, with the singing head bus and those hitchhiking ghosts. Yeah, classic. But there's other elements there as well, including the ballroom, which is sadly lacking those dancing ghosts. You got the seance room, you've got that bride that can be found lurking in the attic, and there's even what seems to be an attempt at that infinite hallway, which for some reason kills you when you walk down it. Kind of funny though how this map is clearly not meant to be taken all that seriously, considering that there's still elements in here that really made me jump quite a bit. Like at one point I was randomly walking down a hallway and then there was the sound of thudding footsteps coming right for me, which genuinely caught me off guard. And then at the end of that same hallway there was a screamer in the form of a very badly photoshopped baby's head that came out of the wall. Yeah, which is kind of proof again that even dumb images can be scary when it catches you off guard. Maybe it's just because I'm a bit of a sucker for this ride in real life. I mean, I went on this ride like 10 times the first time I went to Disneyland. But either way though, I think this map is a whole lot of fun. And intentional or not, it still did a great job of making my asshole pucker up tight enough to shatter lumps of coal. Still though, it was a map that was very clearly pulling its punches. Something which can't be said for the last map in the list, Silent Hill. And yeah, again, like no awards for guessing what this map is supposed to be a reference to. And what a perfect time to be checking this one out as well, right? Considering like it's only a few months now until we can all be disappointed with the Silent Hill 2 remake. Anyway, in this one, you're in some kind of hospital or mental facility that seems to take place in Silent Hill's Otherworld. Which of course means that everything is rusted, gritty, and looking like a tetanus shot waiting to happen. Not only is the general vibe of the map pretty dark and spooky to begin with, but the authors even packed in a few little surprises as well, like collapsing floors, and environments that shift around in real time.
Fuck!
There's even an area that teleports you to an entirely different room, which made me jump out of my chair so high that my balls are now stuck up in my throat. You'll also hear people screaming off in the distance. A fence appears in front of you to block the exits. And then there's a cool little visual trick in one of the bathrooms, with what's very clearly a copy-pasted room trying to pull off the effect of a distorted reflection. Overall, it really captures that feeling of being stuck in a bizarre, nightmarish reality, where your personal demons are interpretations of your worst and nastiest fears, like being stuck in a 2-hour-long Uber ride with irritable bowel syndrome. And out of all of the maps that I tested, this one right here had me shouting out the most, even when I had the place filled up with bots. It's kind of proof as well that despite playing on an engine that's since been updated and improved upon countless times, something like this that's going to be going on 30 years old soon can still deliver the goods when it wants to. Though I still think the most frightening thing is the realization of just how old I'm actually getting. Either way though, that brings me on to the end. I'd be kind of interested to hear as well if anyone else had similar experiences in Counter-Strike back in the day, as well as if there's any other custom maps they got the same vibes from. Also, if you're interested in checking out more maps like this, well, there's a really good video on the same subject by another YouTuber called Base6, which I highly recommend checking out. Still though, that's it from me, so yeah, thanks for watching.